Got it. Right. There we go. Can you see my screen? Yep. Okay, cool. So, hello, my name is Sarah. I am the Mid Wales Red Squirrel Officer for the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, and I'm working on the Mid Wales Red Squirrel Partnership. Yeah, as Linda said, I've got a few slides to show you, but if you just mute yourselves for the duration of the talk to avoid background noise, and then I'll go through some questions at the end. If you want to, feel free to type the questions out in the chat bar so that you don't forget them. You can go through them at the end, or just keep them in your head. That's all fine. There we go. Right, so very nice red squirrel. So just a quick introduction. So this is me, I'm Sarah, I'm the Red Squirrel Officer, and this is the team. So here we have Ben, he's the Grey Squirrel Officer for the West, and this is Phil, he's the Grey Squirrel Officer for the East. And the three of us make up the Red Squirrel team for the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, and we're working on a 3-year project. The first 2 years were part funded by the Lampeter landfill tax scheme, and the rest of the project has been funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And they bought us a lovely shiny vehicle that means that we can actually get out and about into the forest, which is very handy. So this is a little bit of context for you. Obviously there's a map of Wales. The little blue blobs that you're seeing, those are Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales reserves. And then this red circle, this red outline, that is the red squirrel focal site boundary. And the bigger blue outline is the buffer zone. So the idea is the red squirrels live within the red circle. Grey squirrels are outside the blue circle. Between the bands, we keep grey squirrels out to protect the red squirrels so that they never come into contact, and that helps the red squirrels survive. Obviously, that's all in theory. In reality, it's a little bit harder than that. You'll notice there isn't a buffer zone on this northeastern edge. That is just because on the northeastern edge, there is no forestry. That is literally the boundary of forestry that then goes off into upland sheep farming. You'll see on some aerial maps I'll show later, there's no connectivity, so there's not really any risk of grey squirrels coming in through that route. It tends to be more through the valleys, through the woods, from the south, west and east. And yeah, this is just to show that we're quite unusual within the Wildlife Trust in that we are working on land that we don't own. All of the little blue blobs are owned or managed by the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales, and that isn't, there isn't really any overlap. I think there might be one reserve within our focal site, but most of what we're doing is on land owned by other people, which is quite an unusual way of working. So here we have the focus, the priority. This is a lovely red squirrel. They are native to the United Kingdom. They made their way here from mainland Europe around the end of the last ice age. So that's about 10,000 years ago. So if you ever think to yourself, if you have seen a red squirrel, if you've seen a red squirrel in Wales, if you've seen a red squirrel in Wales in the last 20 years, the reality of the situation is that's very few people who have seen red squirrels in Wales within even the last, I don't know, 40, 50 years. And that what that tells us is that we're actually really lucky that so many people still know that red squirrels exist. They know what they are. They have an idea how to recognize them. They're really culturally significant animals, and that's shown by how many people are aware of their identity, of what they look like, despite the fact that very few people have actually seen them. This is a lovely broadleaf woodland, and this is actually the habitat that red squirrels would like to live in, with hazelnuts to feast on, lovely open broadleaf woodland. This is where red squirrels would like to live. However, currently in the UK, pretty much everywhere that's this sort of habitat is dominated by grey squirrels, and they eat all of the food. So you don't tend to find red squirrels in this sort of habitat nowadays. And a little bit about the grey squirrel. So grey squirrels, they are non-native. They were introduced to the UK from America around early 1900s. So they've really not been here very long. It's, you know, just about 100 years that they've been in the UK. And if you think about the impact they've had in that time, it's quite a significant thing. The estimates of the grey squirrel population in the UK are between 2.3 to 3 million individuals, which is a lot. Whereas, so 2.3 to 3 million, whereas red squirrels, the estimates are down to about 120,000, and only about 1,000 to 1,500 of these are in Wales. In mid Wales, our current best guess is between 100 and 500, which obviously not many, also an extremely large error bar. You can imagine the difference between 100 individuals and 500 individuals is quite a large difference. So we are working on trying to, you know, clear that up a little bit to work it out what's actually going on. So yes, I'll go into the reasons that cause this sort of dynamic in a second. So this is a bit of a comparison. So red squirrels, body 25 centimeters, grey squirrel, body 30 centimeters. So, you know, see the body is just a little bit bigger, tail's a bit longer. The weight is a thing to notice. So adult red squirrels, a healthy, good size adult red squirrel will be like 300 grams, but very often they're about 250 grams. Whereas grey squirrels, adults would be 400 to 600 grams. So, you know, often twice the weight of a red squirrel. And the other really significant thing is this density. So red squirrels naturally would live at about 2 to 3 individuals per hectare, whereas grey squirrels often up to 15 individuals per hectare. So that's a lot more squirrel and a lot more of them. So this is why when we talk about eating all the food and competitive exclusion, this is what it means. It's the grey squirrels eat very similar food. You can see at the bottom here, their food, there's a lot of overlap in what they eat, but grey squirrels will just eat a lot more of it because there's more grey squirrels in any given area, and they're a lot bigger, so they eat more of the food per individual. And then there's the squirrel pox factor. So squirrel pox is a disease that grey squirrels carry. It doesn't harm the grey squirrels, it doesn't kill the grey squirrels, but they carry it, and it kills red squirrels. So here's just a quick trigger warning. If any of you are a bit squeamish or about to eat lunch, feel free to just turn away from the screen for a minute. I'm just going to show a couple of images of what squirrel pox can do to red squirrels. So these are red squirrels that have caught and died or dying from squirrel pox. So they've got these scabs and lesions around their mouths, eyes, ears, paws, and genitals. It's a nasty, nasty disease. Generally, what happens is they get more and more unwell, and these scabs and lesions around their mouth, generally, what will actually kill them is they just won't be able to feed anymore. So it'll take about 2 weeks for them to die, and it's normally actually starvation that kills them, but obviously the squirrel pox, of course. So I'll go off these nasty images now. So if anyone wants to look back to your screen, feel free. So that sort of covered the grey and red dynamic. The other problem we have is which is which. You would think that grey squirrels are grey and red squirrels are red, and that is the end of it. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. So I'll go over some top tips in a second, but we'll just do a little mini pop quiz. So if you have a quick look at these 5 images that I've got up here, have a look and see what you think each of these individuals are. Imagine if you saw that run across the road in front of you. Which of these would you think were grey and which would you think are red? So up here, I've given it away already. This one's got a red squirrel. It's got a grey back, but it does have ear tufts and sort of gingery face and paws. And this one is a red squirrel, but obviously grey back, so that can be quite confusing. This next one, again, it's got a bit of a red head, a bit of grey on there, a bit of grey on there, and a gingery body. That one is a grey squirrel, nice and confusingly. Next, we're going down to here to the bottom left. Quite warm, generally tones, no ear tufts, but generally quite a warm colour. That is a grey squirrel. This really dark individual here, almost completely black all over, that's a red squirrel. And then these two chasing each other through the trees, flash of red in their tails. Those are both grey squirrels. So as you can see, coat colour isn't reliable. You can't use that to tell the difference between the squirrels. Ear tufts are something that a lot of people tend to pay attention to. It's a good thing to know about, but it isn't reliable. Lots of red squirrels won't have ear tufts. Often it's only seasonal as well. So around mid-Wales, we tend to see that on our camera traps, we will get red squirrels with ear tufts in the winter, but in summer they tend not to. It's slightly individual variation as well. But ear tufts isn't always a 100% reliable factor. And as you can see, coat colour is extremely variable with both species, and there is quite a lot of overlap. The things that I tend to look for and recommend that people look for are size. If you have a sense of scale, if you can tell where the individual is, or if it's on a camera trap, you've got other species that you've seen in the same location that you can use as a size bearing. Obviously, as you saw in the slides earlier, grey squirrels can often be twice the size. So even on a camera trap, red squirrels do often just look a bit finer and slimmer. So that's quite a useful thing. They're less chunky. And the other key thing to look out for is a tail halo. So you can see on this individual here, it's got quite a good example. It's got a sort of reddish, warm, gingerish core to its tail, but around the outside, there's like a halo where it's sort of dark hairs and then white hairs. And again, on this one, you can see, even in this very much of a blurred image, it's got the grey and the white around the outside of the tail. And again, here, it's got the red core, but they've got dark and then white furs around the outside of their tail. So the tail halo is a good thing to look out for. That is a grey squirrel feature. Red squirrels will often have quite blonde tails, and they'll quite often have like a pale tip to their tail. You can see the colour tends to be more uniform along the hairs in the tail. However, so here's another example. So this is one of our camera trap images from a trail camera above Llandewi Brefi. This is a red squirrel. And you can see it does have a dark core to the tail with a pale outer fur, but I hope you can see the difference between that and what I was describing in the grey squirrels of the tail halo. This is just a blonde tail with a dark core, whereas these ones, it's this outer fur. It's almost a bit badger-like, if that makes sense. But then, you know, as with all things in nature, as soon as you think you've got a nice reliable indicator of a feature, you end up with a photo like this that comes along, this is very clearly a red squirrel, no doubt about that, but it's got a black tail with white fur, which, you know, I can't really describe how that is different to a tail halo. I think it is a different fur feature, but, you know, there's always ones to throw you off. So again, this is just a quick summary of the change over time. Like I said, grey squirrels were introduced in the early 1900s, about 100 years ago, and they were mostly introduced around southern England. In those days, we still had red squirrels all across Wales, Scotland and Ireland. And here you can see grey is grey squirrels only, red is red squirrels only, and orange is both. So the grey squirrels were forging their way into Wales at this point, but we still had red squirrels mostly. And by 2010, we are pretty much dominated by grey squirrels everywhere. This little orange blob, tiny little orange blob, that's us. This little orange blob is Clocaenog, and up here you can see a little bit of red, that is Anglesey. They have managed to remove all of the grey squirrels from Anglesey, so they have a red squirrel only area on Anglesey, and that is starting to spread now back into the mainland, which is quite exciting. But yeah, this just shows the link between the species. Red squirrels, obviously, as with all species, habitat declines and habitat management is a factor, but the most important thing, most causal link is the grey squirrel factor. So this sort of imagery, and this is one of our camera traps with a red squirrel in it, if you can spot it, this little red squirrel down here. This is generally what people tend to think of as red squirrel habitats nowadays. This is what people think red squirrels need, and in a way it is, but if you think about that image I showed earlier of the broadleaf woodlands, that is what red squirrels would like to live in. It's just that place, that opportunity, that niche is completely taken over and dominated by the grey squirrels. That is still where red squirrels would like to be. That is their most appropriate habitat. However, up here in these upland commercial forestry, where they grow a lot of Sitka spruce produce really small seeded cones. And those small seeded cones, I like to think they're a little bit like celery for grey squirrels. They probably take more calories to eat than they get out of them. For grey squirrels that need a lot of food, they're big animals in comparison to reds. Sitka spruce cones aren't worth eating. They're not enough for them. Whereas red squirrels, being smaller, they can survive off Sitka spruce cones, which means that red squirrels, the reason why they have survived here in mid Wales, despite so little attention and the spread of the grey squirrels, the reason for that is because they are living right on the very edge of their survivable range. They are living right on the brink of what they can tolerate. And it's just because they're that little bit smaller than the grey squirrels, it's the area that the grey squirrels can't survive in. So that is why we still have them here. Here we have some satellite imagery of the Mid Wales red squirrel focal site. So Lampeter is just off the side of the screen over here. You can see Llandough Brevi here. So I imagine Dymock Farm is just, just a little bit off the side of the screen here. And this is satellite imagery taken from Google Maps. This is a satellite that went over a couple of years ago. And you can see this is the focal site. You can see why we don't have a border on this northeastern edge. This is not squirrel habitat up here. The center of the focal site isn't really very good squirrel habitat. There's a lot of sheep farming going on here. But then there's the commercial forestry, which is where the red squirrels are surviving. And we have red squirrel records from pretty much all across these areas. You can see how there's very good connectivity in a lot of locations. We kind of have three separate strips. We've got this western strip, which is going up from Lampeter up to Devil's Bridge. Then we have this central strip, this is around Llynbrianny here, Llynbrian. Then we've got Randamoyne down here. This is near Dollar-Coffee. Llanrwtyd is over here, Abergwesin. So you can see there's sort of breaks. And the other thing to notice, so I'm going to zoom in a second to another satellite imagery that was taken just a couple of years after this one. So the things to look out for is this section here. So you can see how it gets a little bit thin. There's not a huge width of standing forestry here. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is that same section and it's just completely gone. So you can see you can just about tell the difference from this, kind of the difference between mature forestry and clear fell and young growth. So these sections here, these are mature trees, this is mature trees, but here, these are young trees that have just been planted, and a lot of this is clear fell. So you can imagine if there was a red squirrel down here, where can it go? Especially if this bit was then clear felled, there isn't really anywhere for that squirrel to go. And again here, like, look at these. This all on a map, this looks like it's all continuous forestry, but in reality, there's all of these are gaps of really young forestry, and they might be big enough that the squirrels can use them as a path to get through from one block to another, but often they're no use as actual squirrel habitat. The squirrels can't survive there. There's not any food. Those trees will not be seed producing. So it is a real issue for us, balancing the needs of obviously the areas where the red squirrels are surviving. They are commercial forestry and they've only survived there because of the commercial forestry. So in a way, we're indebted to the commercial forestry for their existence, providing that opportunity. And they have their own priorities. They need to be able to fell trees and produce timber. But at the same time, the red squirrels are right on the edge, and they clear fell too much and don't leave any links to habitats, then it could be the end for the red squirrels. You can see it's really fragmented habitat. So in 2002, a group of local people came together. They knew that there were red squirrels surviving here in mid Wales, where the rest of red squirrels had declined and gone away, and they weren't red squirrels being seen anymore since around the 1950s. So these are the members, or some of the members of the Mid Wales Red Squirrel Partnership that was formed in 2002. So we've got the Wildlife Trusts, we've got some big forest operators, PRS, Natural Resources Wales, Scottish Woodlands. They manage large amounts of the red squirrel habitat up here. Then we've also got some of the county councils and some other charities. And they've all come together to work to a common goal of trying to protect the red squirrels that we have living here. So this is what we are currently doing. Our current project, we're 2 years in. Obviously the first year, or sort of, I guess it was mostly the second year, was obviously quite largely affected by the pandemic. Put a lot of things on hold and slowed down a lot of things, but we've finally got back on track. And what we are currently doing is we're working with Swansea University. So Phil, who you saw at the beginning, one of our grey squirrel officers, he has a red squirrel handling license, which has been approved by NRW, Natural Resources Wales, which allows us to, well, allows Phil to trap red squirrels and take samples. So what we've been doing, we've only just started, we've only trapped one site so far. We trapped Buckland Area Brevy and we caught 7 individuals. Once you had those individuals in a trap, you run them into a handling cone, which is a bit like a wire bird feeder. So they just run from the trap into the cone. You block off their escape with a little pen, and they just wait in there. And then while they're in there, we cut out a little notch in their tail. You can see in this one it's over here, and in this one it's over here. Obviously this doesn't harm them in any way, but it allows us to identify them as individuals and keep track of them. And the other thing we do is we take hair samples, which we are sending over to Swansea University and this team at the Department of Biosciences. The team there will be analysing the DNA from the hair samples that we're collecting. And hopefully this will help us learn more about the population. So I'll go into that in a second, but that is the primary goal. The primary goal is the DNA analysis that we're doing in Swansea University. As a part of that, obviously, we don't want to keep retrapping the same individuals. For one thing, that would be very stressful for those animals. And for another, it's a waste of resources to keep testing the same hair samples again and again. So that is the main reason why we're doing the notches. It's just so we know we've already caught this individual. So if we catch it in a trap again, we let it go straight away. If we keep catching it in the same trap, then we'll take that trap down and move it elsewhere, because obviously we don't want to harm these individuals. But, you know, this is just a really early finding. This is literally just a photo of my computer when I was whizzing through some images the other day. This is one of the camera traps that we have on one of the traps while they were still set. This trap is locked open. This is an overnight image between our trap runs. This red squirrel had visited to pick up some of the hazelnuts we'd left out for it. And you can see on here, this has got a notch on the left-hand side of its tail. So that is this individual here. So that's really cool to be able to tell which individuals are which like that. This looks a bit complicated, but I'll go through it nice and slowly. So this is what has historically happened in this project. So in the early days, which the project was formed in 2002, and they had to prove that it was worth doing something. At first, they proved that landscape scale grey squirrel control was possible. And then they looked at what we actually have here. So this image here is from a 2005 survey of the Mid Wales red squirrel population, where they took hair samples and did DNA analysis. However, on these occasions, they only did DNA analysis to haplotype level. So each of these blobs, circles, squares, triangles, they are showing a haplotype, and they're showing how closely related they are to each other. So all of the squares in continental Europe, the black circles are Wales. So you can see this is sort of like a map, like a very loose family tree, or a genetic map of the red squirrels. And in 2005, they found in Mid Wales ANG1, which is Anglesey 1. So this haplotype up here, which was also found in Anglesey, hence its name. WC3, which is over here, that has also been found in Clocaenog. And MW1, which is down here. So you can see it's quite closely related to the Mid Wales haplotype, the Anglesey haplotype, and also to the Clocaenog one. They're all quite close together. Now in Canog, they've got WC3 over here and WC9. Now those two are quite far away from each other. So the theory at the time was that the Mid Wales population was a relic population because those haplotypes were all quite closely related, it's very narrow lineage and hinted towards being ancestral Welsh population down here in Mid Wales. Then in 2013, the Vince Wildlife Trust did a hair tube survey of Cwmberwyn, which is one of the forest networks on the west, probably one of the closest ones to Denmark Farm. And then they found the WC3 one again. They also found IEGB1. It's quite a name. Now, IEGB1 is a haplotype commonly found in Ireland. It's the main haplotype in Ireland. And it's also been found in museum specimens, but it hasn't been found anywhere else in Britain. So it's a unique haplotype to Mid Wales in that sense. The thought at the time was that this was possibly due to have been derived from British translocations in the past, but it's really not known. But it's quite an interesting thing to have this unique haplotype to Mid Wales that isn't found anywhere else in Wales or even in Britain. And that was just another sign that the Mid Wales population is worth preserving. Unfortunately, between 2005 and 2013, this Anglesey 2 population haplotype, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it's been rediscovered. By 2013, that had been shown to be extinct. So Anglesey were, by 2013, left with just one haplotype, Ang1. Clocaenog have WC9 and WC3. And Mid Wales had MW1, WC3, ANG1, and IEGB1. So 4 different haplotypes. So you can see these two, MW1 and IEGB1, those two are only found in Mid Wales of the 4. And there's some diversity there. But I've just put IEGB1. Obviously, this was found in 2013, and this image is from 2005. So it's not connected because I don't know where to put it in. So I haven't connected it in. I've just put it off on the side. It's still not very much is known about what that actually means for the Mid Wales population. Now, the limitations of this is this haplotype stuff. It can be really interesting. Obviously, they found out some really interesting stuff in the past about these unique haplotypes. But if you catch 10 individuals, there's a chance that, 9 of them, or even all 10 of them, could be from the same haplotype group. And then you've not really learned that much. So what we're doing now with this DNA work is we're taking it a step further. So up until now, other than the haplotype stuff, now we've got 4 different haplotypes, and then images like this. I'm going to play this video again because I love it. This is camera trap footage from Rhiann, my habit. This is down in Clywedog, not far from NATUR. You can see in this, you've got 4 red squirrels, which is amazing. So pretty much where we've got to up until now is, you get the odd bit of camera trap footage where you have 4 red squirrels at once. So you're like, great, we know we've got 4 there. You might also be getting camera trap footage from, 20 miles away that's getting 1 or 2 red squirrels on camera. So you're like, okay, so there's probably another couple over there. And we know we're getting some over there. But that is why, up until now, our red squirrel population estimate for Mid Wales is 100 to 500, because we really don't know. It's so hard to know by these forms of camera trapping and even actual trapping. It's really hard to know how many individuals there actually are. And even when you do actual trapping work and things like with the tail marking, you're never going to catch 100% of the individuals there. So working out how many there are that you haven't caught is really quite hard work. So what we're doing with Swansea University at the moment is the DNA analysis they're going to be doing with the hair samples is they're taking it to another level. They're going beyond the haplotype stuff, and it's down more comparable to, if you think about on your dogs or on yourselves, if you're interested, you can do DNA tests that show family trees almost. That sort of level is what we're going for. So by taking hair samples and taking it to that level, we'll take hair samples from individuals in the west of the site near CADWCH, and then we'll take hair samples from the east of the site near Abergwesen. And if those individuals have nothing in common, then that could be good news. It says they're not inbred, but it could be bad news. It might show that those two individuals haven't, nor any of their ancestors have ever met. It could show us that the Mid Wales red squirrel focal site isn't actually one population, it's 3 distinct populations that aren't meeting. Or it could show us that the population is bottlenecking. If they're all really inbred, then that tells us that we've got a problem and the population is doing really badly. And it will help us, if you imagine a family tree and you know how related, you catch, say, 100 individuals and you know how related they all are to each other, then you can fill in the gaps. You can work out how many individuals there are that you haven't caught. So that is the goal. That is what we're working on right now. Obviously, it's early days. We've caught 7 individuals up above Llandewi Brefi, and those hair samples are going to be sent off down to Swansea University shortly to start the initial analysis. Then in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start trapping up above Strata Florida. And then slowly over the next year, we're going to work our way around the whole of the Mid Wales focal site to try and catch as many of the individuals as we can to help this DNA work be as informative as possible. So it's microsatellite markers is what we're doing now, rather than mitochondrial haplotypes. This work we're doing now is microsatellite markers, which is a more detailed version of DNA analysis. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, it's early days, but fingers crossed we'll get some good results. This is just sort of a good news and bad news, I'm afraid. These are photos that Susanne Lander took in Purdon just at the beginning of lockdown last year. Actually, she was on one of her daily walks into Purdon and she managed to see a red squirrel and take photos. I put these in to remind me I never want people to be disappointed, and the red squirrels in Mid Wales, like I say, 100 individuals, if it is that few across that big of an area, isn't many. And I don't want people going out there expecting to see them, because the chances are you'll be disappointed. They do get seen. Obviously, these photos are amazing, but I probably get 1 sighting a month reported to me, and it's probably only once or twice a year that someone will actually see one well enough to take photos like this. So they, seeing them in real life is uncommon and a lucky thing. But if you are walking in any of the forests within the focal site, please do keep an eye out. You never know, you might be lucky. And if you do see something, please do let us know. It's always really exciting. But yeah, it's not, unfortunately, we don't have any feeding stations. Problem with feeding stations, they tend to either pine martens will take over them, and the red squirrels know to avoid pine martens, so then the red squirrels don't visit anymore. Or if you put a load of feed out in the forest, then a grey squirrel will sniff it out and come on in, which is why the only place we have a feeding station is up way above Llandewi Brefi, and we monitor that constantly to make sure that no grey squirrels have found it. This is just another one of my lovely, joyful camera trap image of a red squirrel. This is one of my favourites because this was one of the first ones that I found myself when I started in the job nearly 2 years ago now. And it just shows a red squirrel. It's probably having a little scout out for where to cache its food. It was in October, so it's probably thinking about hiding small cones away for the winter. And this is just some more. There we go. That last video didn't play, but I don't think we need that for now. So yeah, that is a quick run through of our project and where we're at now. Obviously, there's a lot more still to come. The results of this DNA work will be really interesting. Most of what we're doing is trying to keep tabs of where the red squirrels are. We use a lot of camera trap work nowadays, which is really, really useful. You can imagine images like this. You just wouldn't see individuals like this without a camera trap, but they're really helpful. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, Zoom doesn't seem to be showing me a chat box, but I can see if I can find that. There it is. Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute and ask any questions or type them out in the chat, feel free. I'm just yabbering on.